My two children, aged 4 and 6, used to jump into bed with me every morning. One morning, when I took a tampon out of the drawer in the bathroom, my son saw me and thought it was drugs. They both became quite agitated and accusatory. I realised that the time had come. We went back to bed and I showed them some pictures in a book called Every Woman, which explained that babies are born from a seed in mummy's tummy. I showed them all the stages of pregnancy. They were very interested and more than happy with my explanation. It was a long time ago now, but it highlighted for me the importance of speaking to children at a young age about all things sexuality, and it laid the foundations of more open conversations.
Just a Sec Education acknowledges the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians and the original educators of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We recognise that this land was never ceded. A few disclaimers before we jump in. This is a sexuality education podcast. For this series, our content will be aimed at parents of 8 to 12-year-olds. Naturally, we'll be talking about bodies, puberty, sex, porn, and other related topics, so please use your judgment when playing it aloud. Hello and welcome to Let's Talk, a podcast by Just a Sec. I'm your host, Fran Folks Taylor, and I'm a sexologist, I'm a dietitian, and I'm the founder of Frank Sexology, where I provide sexuality education in Geraldton, Western Australia. What feelings does the phrase sex talk bring up for you? And how was sex and sexuality talked about in your household growing up, if at all? For many parents and carers, these conversations can leave them in a state of panic. When do we have the talk? How do we have the talk? Are they too young? How do I not make it awkward? These are all very common and normal questions to have as a parent and carer. So to help us do the talking about the sex talk today on Let's Talk, we are joined by Tasha Lawton and Andrew Joseph. Tasha holds a postgraduate degree in sexology and is a qualified counsellor. She has been actively involved in creating respectful relationships programs, workshops to primary and secondary school students, and facilitates groups with young people navigating domestic violence. Andrew lives, works and plays on the Mornington Peninsula, and along with his wife Mandy is a proud parent to 3 amazing children. Andrew describes parenting as a weird and wonderful experience and says he still feels like he's making it up on an hourly basis. Welcome, Andrew, and welcome, Tasha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Now, before we get started, we're going to ask you both a question that we ask all of our guests at the beginning of the episodes, which is, who is your sex ed hero? So I'm going to start with you, Andrew. Who's your sex ed hero?
It's a good question, and I've been giving thought to this. I think from my perspective and my parents' generation, sex wasn't something that we talked about at home. It wasn't sort of normalised. There was a level of uncomfortableness. And so often I think people would go to their parents, but I probably didn't. In fact, I didn't at all because I was probably just as uncomfortable as they were. So I think definitely leaned on my friends to have those sorts of conversations and get an understanding of what was normal. But as I've sort of progressed in life, I've been really privileged and fortunate through my job. I was a youth worker for many years and was exposed to lots of professionals in the sexual health space, sexual health nurses. And so I took a lot away from those discussions probably later in life that I've then applied to my parenting. So I feel really privileged that I was in that position to have that level of information, just to sort of normalise the discussions. So I've kind of been on that journey of probably seeking answers when I was younger, not really getting that from my parents, which isn't a criticism because, it's an awkward and difficult space to be in. But as I've gotten older, I've had that opportunity through work. So, that's kind of my journey.
Yeah. So no one's specific, but that's just been your journey.
Probably. There's just been several nurses actually that came and had conversations with students. There's one in particular, Tina. She was amazing.
Go Tina.
Go Tina. Represent Tina. She Yeah, she just normalised it. She just
Yeah.
was really comfortable, just was quite open and transparent, not around her own sexual experiences, but just normalising it. And I think young people could relate to that. And that's just because she allowed that conversation. I think I've taken those lessons and those learnings away from Tina. So Tina's watching this. Great job.
Great, thank you. And Tasha, what about you? Who's your sex ed hero?
I think I had the same sad story of, no parental role model to talk about it. But I think, like everybody else, actually, that's probably a very, very similar story for most. So I think for a while there, I became my own sex hero. And then I realized I was really not doing a very good job of that at all. And thankfully, Jean Milburn came along. So do I need to give her any more description?
I reckon. I don't know if everyone will know. So, and some people might not have seen the show.
And if you haven't, you should see it. Apart from the last series, which I feel like they just went a bit rogue on. So, Sex Education. Gillian Anderson played Jean Milburn, the sex therapist in Sex Education, and I just think that she did, or the writers obviously did a fantastic job. So she then became, my more modern day sex hero. And then I have to say Jackie Hendricks being my teacher through the postgrad as well at Curtin Uni. So yeah.
Great, thank you both very much. So we're going to jump right into it. Tasha, are you able to tell us what is the sex talk?
The sex talk. Well, first and foremost, I don't think it is the one and only sex talk. It's often thought of as one big intimidating conversation about sex, but it doesn't and shouldn't, in my humble opinion, be that way. In fact, I think it's way more effective to think of it as more of an ongoing dialogue rather than a one-time event. But for me, this means starting with the basics of understanding bodies, respecting others, discussing how babies are made in simple age-appropriate terms. It's also about teaching kids, young people, the importance of consent and boundaries. And I think the goal ultimately is to create a safe and open environment where kids can feel comfortable enough to ask questions, discuss the topics as they grow and their understanding deepens and they come across more things, social media, peers. So it's about laying a foundation of trust and openness so that as the kids encounter new information or situations, which they're going to do, shock horror, they know that they can basically come to you for guidance and accurate information. And breaking it down into smaller, manageable conversations makes it way less overwhelming for both the parent and the child. And really what you're trying to do is provide them with the knowledge and skills they need to make informed and healthy decisions as they mature. So that's my take on what is the sex talk.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's a good opportunity to say we did call this episode the sex talk, but we did so to sort of debunk that as the talk and that singular talk. So thank you. That's great. And then what about you, Andrew, in your household with your kids? Has it been one talk or has it been different
I really
conversations?
resonated with what was just shared then because I was talking to Mandy, my wife, this morning in preparation for today, and my dad gave me the talk like it was literal and I still remember it like explicitly in my head. We were watching a TV show, E Street, back in the day, and many people would know that TV show. And there was an episode where they were in a pub and there was a condom vending machine and that was on the show. And I looked at my parents and I was like, what's that? and Dad looked at Mum and he's like, it's time. And he grabbed me and my sister and took us into the bedroom and told us what sex was. Whoa. And it was quite alarming. Like I was like, oh, wow. And it took me back to a year before when my friend had told me, but I didn't link the two together. If I come forward to where we are now with Mandy and myself, we didn't have the talk. I think I'm quite proud of actually how we've maybe facilitated or just had the conversation with our kids just over their lives. And really privileged, again, I use that word, having Mandy as my partner. She sort of grew up in a household where it was totally normalised. My household probably not so much. So I've probably leaned more on Mandy and just being really natural and organic around having conversations with the kids over their journey, our eldest being 17. So, just their curiosity, asking questions, like we're pretty open, like we'll have a shower and we'll walk between rooms nude, like, and kids will ask questions when they're younger, like what's that hair and where's that? And we're just being pretty open. And kids these days, they are exposed to stuff a whole lot earlier. We've seen that, like our youngest, she was, a lot of her friends are on social media and they're exposed to stuff. So it kind of then brings out these sorts of conversations, like the importance of consent and body shaming and all that kind of stuff. So
lots of teachable moments.
So there definitely hasn't been the talk like I had, which is pretty traumatic. But there's been lots of moments, and I think we're doing a pretty good job. So.
Oh, that's brilliant. And Tasha, what age would you recommend to sort of start having these conversations with children?
Oh, it's a hot topic, that one, isn't it? For me, there's a difference between age appropriate and age relevant. If you use the word appropriate, that basically lands very differently for different people. But if you flip that and you use the word relevant, that I think gets everybody back on the same page, because you can't deny where we're at in society with what things are available and what people are looking at. So, I mean, the right age to start can vary, but it's very, very important, I believe, to begin earlier than many parents might actually think. I mean, you can start having age-relevant conversations about bodies, boundaries, and relationships as soon as your child starts asking questions, which that can be as young as 3 or 4. But even before that, not so much conversation per se, obviously, but making sure you avoid euphemisms for body parts. And as you're washing your child, for example, point out and name the parts that you're washing. Preschool, so like 3 to 5 years old, that's when you can start talking about basic body parts and their correct names, simple explanations of where babies come from. Start to talk about privacy and body autonomy. So your body is yours and you can say no if someone touches you in a way that you don't like. And then I think early elementary, kind of 6 to 8 years old, you can have more detailed discussions about how babies are made, and again, in simple terms, introduce the concepts of consent and respecting other people's boundaries, basic information about puberty and the changes that are going to happen. And then as they get older, obviously more detailed information about puberty, including the physical and emotional changes. But I think the earlier the better, but without kind of making it's talking about sex without talking about sex. We don't need to talk about sex. We just need to like build a framework around it, I think, rather than actually having to be so sex specific, which I think is why it scares half the people to death as well.
Yeah, so sort of laying the foundation and then building. And how old were your kids when you started bringing these conversations in?
Again, very much dependent on their age.
Yeah.
So like early, like we were having conversations, and again, it was based on their curiosity and questions from an early age, just around body parts and hygiene and all those sorts of things. And then as the kids have gotten older and progressed in their age and their maturity, other things have arisen, which we've had to address. Lots of awkward conversations. We've got two young boys, a 17 and a 14-year-old, so they're at that kind of time where they're probably exploring their bodies and, they're on social media and they're with, they're interested in girlfriends and those sorts of things as well. So, we're regularly having conversations dependent on where they're at and what they bring to us.
Yeah. And Tasha, just to go back to, you said before, the word sex, I think it's obviously not just talking about sex. When we say, I guess, sex ed or talking about sex, what does the word sex, I guess, encompass in that?
Again, yeah. I mean, massive, right? You'd be aware of this, the amount of studies that have been done as well, when you're actually asking people what sex means to them. You know, for some people, obvious is penis, vagina. Well, actually, I wouldn't even say it's that obvious, but the actual proper labeled definition back in the day was penis in vagina, orgasm from the male. That was sex. Like, that's actually what sex was defined as. And obviously we know that there's so many different ways of looking at that word sex, the different types of sexual activity. You've got oral sex, anal sex. There's physical intimacy, the kissing and touching, manual stimulation, masturbation, dry humping, emotional intimacy side of it with the emotional connection and the sharing feelings. Like that's sex, and like a layer of it, and in the intimacy, consent, mutual agreement, mutual consent. And I think also then when you move into and you start thinking about the diverse expressions of sexuality, LGBTQ plus world, you know, there's so many different ways of experiencing sex there that, we just have to open our minds way, way, way wider, and to actually consider what that means for many different people. So I think it's got lots of different meanings now.
Yeah, absolutely. More of an umbrella term for sexual activity and all those other things you mentioned. And I guess, when should we expect that our children will start being sexual or maybe experimenting in this way?
Oh, do parents actually really want to hear that? Actually, what you just said, Andrew, then, but, you know, exploring themselves. What did you say, 14 and 17? Kids are going to start touching themselves early childhood, 2, 3. You know, and that doesn't necessarily, obviously, they're not being sexual, they're being curious, as is a normal developmental stage, and discovering that touching certain parts of their body can feel pleasurable. Totally natural part of learning about their bodies, innocent exploration, and, you know, that can start then including questions about where babies come from. So I think the parental approach for that is, don't panic, respond calmly and without shame. Like, the last thing you want to do here, and I think this is where, you know, we've got a massive shame culture, and I'm not saying down to parents, but I think how we react to our kids around their sexuality or anything to do with sex, anything that comes up around that, really can define how they see themselves, and lay a solid foundation for what that then does for them as they mature. So it's really important as parents that we can, the more information that we know and educate ourselves about these stages, the better. So then we don't freak out, and we don't, you know, respond in an inappropriate way. And I know, like, you know, it's not a perfect world, and we're all doing our best. If the early years, you know, it's an opportunity to teach them about privacy. So you might say to them then, it's okay to touch your body, but it's something you do, like in your bedroom or in the bathroom. Like, don't shun it, don't pretend it's not happening, don't say it's disgusting, don't say it's wrong. Find a way to engage, but in a way that is normalizing it, but just, you know, like, that's just something that we do in private. Have I even answered I can't remember what the question was.
No, absolutely. You definitely answered the question. What about in terms of and you don't have to answer this, Andrew, in your household, was there a specific age that, like, your children, that you noticed those behaviours where they might have been touching themselves just because it feels good when they're younger? And, you know, how did you find yourself responding to that?
Yeah, well, definitely when they were much younger, like, there's that curiosity with boys and their penis, and, like, stretching it and, like, playing with it, like, just, it was just, that's just natural and normal.
And girls too.
And girls too, absolutely. But yeah, obviously as they sort of got older and it become a bit more apparent, you know, there's things that we observed or maybe things that weren't explicitly mentioned to us that my wife and I have had to have conversations with our two boys about, particularly around, I don't want to go into too much detail, but just around just being, I think, respectful but again, normalising that it's completely fine, it's completely okay to experiment with yourself and the importance of appreciating pleasure, but just being respectful to mum and I around mess and things like that. So that's kind of, you know, the conversations that we've had. But it's always been based on respect, trust, and for us as well, educating ourselves. I think there's always this importance of being having that information so that you then feel confident to have the conversation as well, rather than just burying your head in the sand and saying, I don't want to have this conversation. Yeah. And Mandy and I, we talk regularly and, you know, we problem solve and, you know, discuss how we're going to approach this as a team.
That must be great to have each other, you know, and just, bounce ideas off and like, hey, this cropped up. How should we approach it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're backing each other. We're on the same page, and I think our values are really, really similar in how we approach things. So yeah, we're lucky in that regard.
Yeah.
My son will kill me, but never mind.
Not here.
When he started wanking, I found he was using like some really bad, like ascorbic kind of soap weirdness in his room. So I was like, okay. So I bought him some almond oil instead. I was like, we'll just do a little swap. See if, you know, this might be a little bit more pleasurable for you. So like stuff like that. And then also I remember when he was first starting to do that as well, he was talking about like how normal it was, how many times a day or so. I know for some people that is horrific. I do still tell some of my friends, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you. That's, you know, that's just next level. But I just find the more normal you can make it, the more you can normalize these conversations with them and not be so, you know, like pushed under the carpet and even with girls, like, I mean, there's some, I don't know about you, but there's some girlfriends of mine in their 30s, 40s that still didn't realize that they had 3 holes and what each hole was for, you know, like the younger they are and understanding what each one is and what job it does, that's all part of the exploration as well to get yourself ready and more confident, self-confident, because ultimately isn't that what we're trying to do, is just give our kids self-confidence and self-knowledge, body autonomy, and as much information as possible. So then when they do move into that sexual space where they are getting active, that they have a whole lot more knowledge and it's not just all based on, I mean, obviously, yes, trial and error, that you've got to get out there and experience that too. But there's less things that can go wrong, or it's just more of a confidence, you know, the more knowledge you have.
That understand themselves better and their personal boundaries. And
for us, I mean, we've made a conscious effort of ensuring that for them it's really safe to be able to have these conversations, and it's actually paid off for us. We've had some situations where like our eldest had some really challenging things occur and which was really, really traumatic for him. And he came straight to us. Like he came straight to us and he spoke about it. And we're able to kind of, you know, support him through that. But I think that had we not been so open, transparent and create that environment where it's safe to talk about these things, he probably wouldn't. No. And he would have, you know, gone down a deep spiral. Yeah. So I think by actually having these conversations, being upfront, honest and creating that safe space where it's normalised, that if shit does hit the fan, like they will come to you and they won't hide it. So I think that's something that you need to acknowledge too.
Absolutely. And credit to you and Mandy for creating that space as well. Yeah. And in terms of, I guess, sexual behaviour that's in those realms of healthy or normal or safe, how do we know if our children are in those realms of healthy and normal?
I think, early childhood, 2 to 5, you've got the curiosity, touching themselves, playing doctors and nurses. That's all perfectly normal.
Quote unquote, yeah.
Healthy. Middle ages 6 to 8, they're looking for a bit more privacy. So when they're dressing or using the bathroom, again, normal. You start thinking, oh God, they're hiding something or something's wrong, but that's just a normal developmental phase. More interested in where babies are coming from, asking questions about reproduction and the differences between boys and girls. That's common and again, normal. Occasional touching of their own genitals are going to, that's going to continue. And again, typically in private. Pre-adolescence, so around like 9 till 12. They're starting to show an interest in changes that are happening during puberty. Perfectly normal, healthy, increased awareness of sexuality. They might start having crushes and talking about that with their peers. Private exploration, again, more frequently in the privacy of their own bedroom again, or wherever is private in the bathroom, again, as they're approaching puberty. I'd say, this is a dangerous area of like, when it's not normal, but,
But say unsafe or perhaps, or...
I guess, potential signs of potential concern, if it's happening, if they're engaging in sexual behaviors in public or inappropriate settings, obsessions or compulsions around sexual behaviors. I guess if there's any seemingly distress or secretive or ashamed behavior or that harmful behavior, if it's aggressive, that you see it being aggressive or coercive, or obviously harming themselves or others. I mean, it's kind of like a pretty broad guideline.
There's for parents, there is a traffic light system, for sexual behaviours that could be really helpful if parents have specific questions as well.
Yeah.
What about in terms of sexual orientation? How can we support our children to, I guess, be true to themselves and when it comes to who they're attracted to, for example, if anyone?
Well, I mean, for me, it's just open communication. I mean, you really have got to look at, we all do, and I say you, myself included, you've got to look at ourselves. We've got to really understand what our biases are, and we all have them, what our values are, what our attitudes are, what our beliefs are when it comes to sexuality, religion, everything, because that's what whether we like it or not, whether we try to or not, that's what we do. We pass it on. We've had our stuff passed down. That's what we're going to do. So we just have to be really, really careful of understanding and knowing ourselves, and then being able to put this lens of inclusive language, the communication, make a safe space, be a role model, and show acceptance and respect for all people, regardless of their sexual orientation. If we're modeling inclusive behavior and attitudes, affirming their identity, whatever that is, whatever they come to us with, listening, validating, empathizing. I mean, I don't know. For me, there's a whole load of common sense stuff that goes with this, and just being, a decent human that is there to understand and listen and be open and respectful to what someone else is going through. I mean, that, but
yeah, absolutely. And Andrew, have any of these, I guess, conversations cropped up in your household or within your school, or how have you addressed those?
Yeah, absolutely. Like our kids have, I think, are pretty inclusive in the way that they view the world. But in saying that, I don't know if it's common in kind of regional, which we are sort of considered our locality, it's a pretty conservative area.
Right.
And so there still is levels of, I would suggest, discrimination, homophobia. It's pretty common, which is terrible. And so I think we have a role to call it out. And I mean, our kids have been caught up in it, in just using words like inappropriate language, like that's gay or, just things that shouldn't be said. And so we just call it out straight away and, tell the kids the importance of safe and inclusive language and what that means. But also I think that there's been a really positive shift in and I have hope in the next generation that like that level of discrimination and just not being inclusive is just going. Like people will die and like that'll go with them, like the older generation where it's often quite set. And I've got hope with our kids. Like I hear my children, talk quite freely around kids that they know that are questioning their gender and their sexuality, and they don't really care. Like it's just like, oh, whatever, so that gives me hope. So Mandy and I, we openly talk about it, and if we do hear or see things that we feel aren't appropriate, we'll call it out because the kids know that we don't stand for it. So
so setting that being that role model
because they pick up on the heteronormative language. There's a lot of language that is still very much ingrained and intrinsic. But as we've talked about, the kids will pick up on that. So it is up to us to expand where we can. I mean, and that whole straight people they don't have to come out as being straight.
No, exactly. And what about, I suppose, that more conservative school of thought that talking about sex will make our kids want to have sex or it destroys their innocence? Like what your, response to that?
Well, thankfully, there's been, 87 different studies. UNESCO's technical technician guide to sexuality. That was in 2008. And then I think there was another 77 control experiments and trials and systematic reviews done in 2016 that says categorically it's not going to happen. Just because you talk about sex more doesn't mean they're going to run off and have it. In actual fact, it does the opposite. It means that they become more risk adverse. Is that the right word? There's higher condom use, contraception. It's the same with anything. If you normalize something, if you normalize the shit out of something, it gets boring. It's not exciting anymore. So the more you can talk about it and the more you take the ooh away from it, like the less likely they're going to run out and do it. And they just become, I don't know, you're just better prepared. And STIs and, the number of pregnancies have dropped as well, the more you talk about it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I 100% agree with everything you've said there. And it's like what I was saying before about education and educating ourselves so that we then feel comfortable and confident to have those conversations. And it's like so many things that young people are exposed to these days that we as parents feel scared to have that conversation. And one of those is like social media. It's like kids are going to be using social media and they're using it early.
Yeah.
Like don't avoid it. Actually educate yourself and then have a conversation with your kids about it and don't prevent them because they're going to be on it regardless, and that's the way that things are moving, like they have. So, you can't bury your head in the sand.
You're right. It's a case of when, and who do you want? Who do you want having that conversation with your kids? It's not you. Yeah. It will be someone else. They're going to learn it. They're going to find out.
Exactly.
And even though mine wasn't the greatest experience with my dad, I'm still glad I had that conversation, and it wasn't for someone else having that conversation.
Yeah. So. And I think that's important to remember. It's better to have an awkward conversation than no conversation at all because they're still listening and they're still hearing. Yeah. And they're knowing that you're a safe person.
Ultimately, teaching kids about their bodies and respecting others, it doesn't destroy their innocence. It basically protects them and helps them grow up with a healthy understanding of themselves.
Okay, so we're going to get to the nitty-gritty, the actual discussions to have with our children. So, Tasha, how would you recommend actually telling our children and explaining these concepts?
Okay, well, I know the audience here is like, it's 8 to 12, but we're talking about starting it early.
Parents,
Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you haven't got young kids, doesn't matter. There's still time. You haven't messed it up completely. But if you do have younger ones,
There's still time.
there's still time. If you do have younger ones, begin with the basic concepts when kids are young and build on them as they grow older. I mean, that's the overall message. And then you tailor the complexity and the detail in line with their developmental stage. So early childhood, let's say like ages 3 to 5, boys have a penis and girls have a vulva, and vulva, not vagina, vulva. These are private parts, and it's important to keep them private. Like, that's all we're saying, that's how you start it. Right, middle childhood, 6 to 8. As you grow, your body will change. Boys and girls develop differently, and that's normal. Ages like 9 to 12, during puberty, your body will go through changes like growing breasts or getting a deeper voice. This happens to everyone. That's the real basic concept. However it happens. Sorry, go.
I was just going to say if there was a question from a younger child about where babies are made, but I might be jumping the gun.
Well, you've got to answer questions honestly. That's the other part. If a kid comes to you with this question, like gold, absolute gold, like that's jump on that. Don't let that fly by through to the keeper. Like, muddle your way through whatever you can do, but answer it.
Yeah.
So when they're asking about sex, sex is a way, you could say sex is a way that adults express their love and intimacy. It can also be how a baby is made. It's important to wait until you're older in a loving and respectful relationship and to understand the responsibilities involved. So that's a direct response to asking about sex. Basic reproduction. A baby starts to grow when a sperm from a man and an egg from a woman come together. I think discussing relationships, you could say people get married, if that's what they're asking about marriage, just relationships, don't have to be marriage, but let's use marriage as an example, because they love each other and want to make a commitment to share their lives. Not everyone gets married. That's okay. What's important is that the relationship is based on respect and a care for each other.
So I think recently my niece she got that explanation of a sperm meeting an egg and growing in the tummy, but she really wanted to know, but how does it get in there? So then would we explain the man's penis goes in the woman's vagina? Would you explain that?
How old?
Well, she's 6. Say if she was, say if a 6 to 8 year old, like, would that be an explanation that you could give?
Do you know what I think as well in that scenario is understanding a little bit more about where that question has come from too. Is it something that she's heard? Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes I think kids pick up on stuff, or they've heard a question before and they'll come to maybe to see what the reaction is, or I just think that that's another important layer that I haven't brought in, the fact that to question the question as well, to see how much more they know, or where they may have got the information from, or what they think, and then off that, based on, your kids, how much information they already know, how advanced, again, for a better word, they're at, because I do think it is kind of on an individual basis too.
So it's hard you can't necessarily give a specific age. You have to be guided by where their knowledge is at.
I think so. And what's happened before, and like, why is this new coming out of nowhere, but ultimately, if they're asking a question, you want to give them a straight answer, and you're talking about the mechanics at that age, biologically, penis, vulva, the sperm. Yeah. And, if they want to know how, again, I think your child, and if that's going to be something that they can, I was going to say swallow, but that would be a really bad choice of word given the topic.
Probably, yeah. What about for you, Andrew? And have you had any of those those specific questions about how babies are made, or did it just feel like those were sort of answered in the small discussions you had?
Yeah, I think there's just been little like sound bites, little times where the kids have asked curious questions. Like Mandy may have, but I don't think we've communicated that where the kids have asked us direct questions around like how was I made? Like what occurred? I don't think I can't remember I've had the sit down kind of my dad kind of relationship conversation. So I think there's just been a variety of things that we've shared with the kids over the years, depending on what they've asked, and a lot of it's just come back to kind of similar things that we shared earlier around just respect and just love and care, and versus going into the specific details. I don't think that we would avoid that.
No.
I don't think we have. There's probably has been times where we've provided a level of detail, but I can't come to mind straight away.
And I think there's a lot of, like we were saying in previous episodes, books are a wonderful resource for parents as well. So finding a book that might, answer those questions that they might not feel equipped to answer in that moment, reading it with the child, and if you feel that they're ready for that information, answering those nitty-gritty about, where do I come from, or like how did that baby get in there, I think can be very helpful as well.
I know what we have done though, was probably for our older kids is like the negativity around like porn, like not so much negativity around porn, but feeling that could be like how sex is. And so I have definitely had that conversation with my boys around that. And it coming back to sort of the respect and the love and care for one another versus what you might see in that space. So I don't know how that came into my brain, but I think it's important to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they're very much exposed to that because the internet's so accessible, and our boys have got phones, and I'm tipping that's what's happening. So
probably a pretty good guess. And what about explaining sort of how babies are made to a child that wasn't conceived through heterosexual intercourse, or intercourse at all if it was a heterosexual couple, like if they had a baby through IVF, or maybe say it's a queer family? How would you go in having those conversations?
So a basic explanation for IVF, some babies grow from a tiny cell called an egg and another tiny cell called sperm, and sometimes doctors help put these cells together in a special way to help a baby start growing. And I think for a heterosexual couple, you could describe it, like mum and dad needed a little help from a doctor to make you. The doctor took a tiny egg from mum and a tiny sperm from dad, put them together in a special way to help you to start growing. That's for early child. Yes. And for a queer family, you could say, we wanted you so much that we asked a special doctor to help us. They used a tiny egg and a tiny sperm to help you start growing. I think for a little bit older, doctors can help make babies by taking a sperm from a dad or a donor and an egg from a mum donor, again, putting them together in a special dish. This helps the baby start growing before they're placed in the mum or the surrogate's tummy. I think then for a queer family, as a child gets older, it's similar, along the similar things around, like we asked a special doctor to help us, but you can then bring in the donor word. So they combined an egg from a donor and a sperm from a donor. And then when the baby started growing, they placed the tiny baby in mum's or the surrogate's tummy.
Just saying it how it is, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's all very positive again. It's that thing of normalizing it, be honest, be age relevant, use positive language, incorporate their story, make the explanation personal, special. so that the child ends up feeling unique and loved. I mean, ultimately, that's what you want.
Have there been conversations about IVF for, I guess, any queer families in your realm or sphere at all,
There's definitely
Andrew,
friends and family that have had IVF to have a baby, and I don't know if it's explicitly come up in conversations with our kids. Mandy, my wife, perhaps has had those conversations. So yeah, I'm not too sure. I think again, our kids are just really open and respectful for however people come to be, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those conversations I think would just naturally happen if they were there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the point around consent is like a really, really important one, and Mandy, my wife, and I have definitely had that conversation with our children, and in particular our eldest, who had a girlfriend for a couple of weeks. And,
long term.
Long term. But we made sure that we had that conversation just up front around consent and the importance of respect and taking things slow and just being really open around communication. So I think, that's something that parents may not be that educated on, the realms of consent and what that means in the way of age. And again, I'm fortunate that I've had that level of awareness and education, but I think often parents would have no idea around what consent even means and the age of consent, and just educating yourself on that, I think, is a really, really important thing to have in your toolkit.
Absolutely. And listening to the consent podcast episode for this podcast. That could be a good one.
A good plug, There you go.
Just to say as well, that the latest stats from Australian high schoolers show that by the time they're 15, about 40% have had oral sex and about 1 in 12 have had anal sex. So it is important for parents to understand that these are the choices that some young people are making, and to be open and able and willing to talk about that with them. And again, absolutely stressing within that the consent part too. Yeah. Just one last thing about this different types of sex. So some people might say that certain types of sex are safer or better than others. That's another thing you hear the kids talking about. And ultimately what matters most is that both people feel good about it and that they're being safe. I think that's a really important message for parents to be able to pass on to the kids too.
Yes, definitely. And are there any really good resources that you'd recommend for parents and carers in having any of these discussions with their children? Are there any that you sort of go to? There's
a really good book, Secret Girls Business and Secret Boys Business. I don't know if you've heard of that. That by Faye Angelo. That's like for middle around ages 7 to 10. Puberty Boy by Jeff Price, I think it is. That's for like more the age 10 to 15. But in terms of online resources for parents, Raising Children Network, Healthy Kids, True Relationships and Reproductive Health, Sexual Health Victoria, Family Planning New South Wales. There's the Australian Research Centre in Sex, Health and Society. Headspace has always got good stuff. Safe Schools Coalition Australia. There's the E-Safety Commission. There's Parent Line. I mean, there are actually quite a lot of...
There's lots, yeah.
I was going to give a plug.
Yeah, go on.
So my role, I work for in local government, and local governments generally across Australia will have a youth services arm within their local government, and it's generally a sort of a no wrong door approach where parents or anyone in the community can come in and ask questions related to children and young people, and that service is generally able to find other appropriate referral pathways. So I would suggest if you're in a community that's got a local government youth services, reach out to them and they'll be able to be that conduit to like a sexual health service or a community health or Headspace or whoever that can provide that support as well.
Yeah, that's a wonderful tip.
Got a really good talk soon, talk often.
Yep, can vouch for that. That's a great book.
That's really helpful in stepping out the age appropriate things, relevant appropriate things to say at each phase and stage.
Absolutely. And they have a wonderful website as well, Get the Facts, which is very informative for parents and children. So, Tasha and Andrew, what if the subject never comes up? So what if the child, for example, never asks about sex or sexuality?
Any opportunity, don't hide away from it, please, because they are, like we've said, they're going to find out, they're going to go looking for it. So bring it up as uncomfortable. And if you're
proactive,
100%, and you know what, if you're uncomfortable about it, ask yourself why you're uncomfortable about it, because that might be something, you need to understand, again, like I said right at the beginning, what your triggers, biases, attitudes, values, morals, beliefs. I mean, like, it's a big topic. It triggers a lot of people. It really does.
It just needs to be normalised. It's like so many other things that, there's historical stigma associated with mental health. Like if you talk about mental health, it's going to cause mental distress. Like, we openly talk about mental health in our family, and it's kind of a similar kind of concept. Just openly talk about things. The more you talk about it, educate yourself, feel confident and comfortable, the kids are going to do that with you. And then if something happens, they're going to come to you. And that's what I think most parents would want to have in their household. So as I said, don't avoid it, just talk about it.
And look, I guess easier said than done.
100%.
But there's lots of, I guess, resources out there to help. Yeah. Just to sort of finish off, what are the key messages, Tasha, that young people should know when it comes to sexual behaviour?
I think the number one thing is consent. I think respect and communication, safety and protection, understanding your body, emotional well-being, the different types of sexual behaviour, dealing with peer pressure, respect for diversity. That's quite a lot, but I think they're all very, very important key points, really.
Any to add to those?
No, I've got nothing.
It's now time for Sex Ed Spotlight. So this is where we ask our guests to help us answer a question that's been sent in by a parent or carer from the community. And please remember, listeners, that you're welcome to tailor the response to your personal situation. So our question today is from the carer of a 12-year-old child. She says, recently, my 12-year-old has started spending lots of time hanging out with their boyfriend after school. I know they're both young, but I have a hunch there may be more than just studying going on. So I'm wondering, is it too early to be talking to my 12-year-old about STIs and contraception?
It's absolutely appropriate to talk to your 12-year-old about STIs and contraception. At this age, kids are often starting to learn more about their bodies and are obviously going to be exposed to information about sex from their peers, from media or school. And why it's important is because of prevention and safety, building a foundation. Early discussions obviously lay the groundwork for more detailed conversations as they grow older. By having a conversation about it, you're building open communication and trust. You're encouraging responsible behavior, teaching them about STIs and contraception encourages responsible decision-making. It promotes self-practices when they do become sexually active. It's age appropriate, age relevant. At 12, they're capable of understanding basic concepts related to health and safety. So providing accurate information can help also dispel myths and prevent misinformation. So, I think, focus on the health and safety, normalize the conversation. As you get, you could say something like, as you get older, it's important to know about different ways to stay healthy. One thing to know about is sexually transmitted infections or STIs. They're infections that can be passed between people through sexual contact. The best way to protect yourself from STIs is by using condoms. If you desire to have sex, condoms help prevent the spread of infections. I mean, it doesn't have to be a highly emotional, like it's a teachable moment. And this is what we are hanging out for, really. And that it's our job.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you both very much, Andrew and Tasha, for joining us on today's episode. Tasha, where can our listeners find you or your work?
You just have to go to talknow.edu.au, and that's
Great.
where we produce a whole load of online education programs for schools, for teachers, for kids in primary and secondary, throughout all the respectful relationship programs, topics even.
Any plugs for you, Andrew?
No, not at all. Just thanks for giving us the opportunity to have a chat.
No worries at all. Thank you very much. For any resources we mentioned today, listeners, please go to our show notes. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow and share with your community. And you can find us on Instagram at its_justasec or online at itsjustasec.com. I'm Fran. Thank you for listening, and remember, it takes only just a sec to start these conversations.